I was 20, this was last year, and I was in Hong Kong with my dad and my brother because we'd been at the immigration department handling paperwork. Only relevant detail? It had dragged on longer than we expected, and by the time we left, everybody was tired and slightly snappy in that way you get after fluorescent lights and waiting rooms. We took a bus part of the way back, then got off somewhere my brother insisted had food. It was one of those stops where the street is loud and bright, and there's a ton of signage stacked on itself, but you're still weirdly boxed in by buildings. I remember the air being heavy, like it might rain later, and my stomach doing that hollow thing it does when you've had too much coffee and not enough actual food. Within a couple minutes of walking, I realized I needed a bathroom badly. Not the "I should go soon" kind. The kind where you start counting minutes and your brain gets very narrow and practical. The nearest place was a McDonald's. It looked normal from the outside. Busy, lit up, people moving behind the windows. Nothing about it suggested anything weird. My dad and brother stayed downstairs near the ordering area while I went up the stairs, because I figured the bathrooms would be upstairs like they usually are. Up there, I didn't immediately see any restroom signs. I saw tables, a few people scrolling on phones, and that kind of half-clean, half-sticky floor you get in places that are constantly being mopped but never fully dry. I did a quick scan, walked a little farther, checked the corners near the seating area. Nothing. There was a worker up there, and he watched me in a way that made it obvious he'd noticed I was looking for something. I didn't think much of it at first. In a busy place, staff tend to track anyone who looks lost. I walked over and asked where the toilet was. He pointed to a plain brown door. No restroom symbol. No staff only. No sign at all. Just a brown door that looked like it belonged to a maintenance hallway. He indicated I should go through it, turn left, and take a lift up. If I hadn't been desperate, I probably would have asked more questions. But urgency makes you dumb. It makes you trust shortcuts. So I opened the door. The second it shut behind me, it felt like I'd stepped out of the restaurant and into a different building. The sound changed first. The clatter and voices dropped to almost nothing, like the door was thick and sealed. The lighting was dim, and the walls looked older and scuffed. It wasn't filthy, but it didn't feel public. I stood there for a second, just adjusting, and my first thought was that it was some weird back passage to a mall or another connected building. Hong Kong has those kinds of layouts. Not every shortcut has signs. People just know. I followed the direction he'd pointed. Left, around the corner. There was a lift, like he said. That should have reassured me, but it did the opposite. It was too quiet. Quiet in a way that felt wrong for being directly attached to a busy restaurant. The lift doors looked used, scratched up, like they'd been there longer than the McDonald's interior. I pressed the button. The doors opened, and I stepped in. I remember it smelled faintly like damp concrete and stale air conditioning, like a storage room. Then I heard the brown door open again behind me. Footsteps. The worker walked into the lift with me. He had a black trash bag in his hand, but it looked almost empty, like it had a few light things in it. I did the mental scramble people do to keep calm. Maybe he was taking trash somewhere. Maybe staff used this lift. Maybe he'd realized he needed to show me the way because the restroom was confusing. He pressed a floor button without asking me which one. Second floor. The lift started moving. The ride was short, but it felt long because it was just the two of us, and it was quiet in that sealed way, like the lift swallowed sound. He had a face mask on. His eyes were hard to read, partly because one of them drifted. It made it difficult to tell where he was looking, and that alone put my body on alert. Then he said something in Cantonese that I didn't understand at the time, but the tone was unmistakable. The kind of tone that isn't about directions or customer service. Later, I learned it was him calling me pretty. I reacted in the most automatic way possible. Small, polite, dismissive. Not encouraging, not confrontational. Just trying to keep it neutral. When the doors opened, I expected a brighter public corridor, something with signage, cameras, maybe a mall entrance. It opened into a dark hallway with multiple doors, and the light didn't reach the corners. It looked like an office corridor that had been abandoned, or the back end of an apartment building that no one used. The air felt different too, stale and slightly dusty. We both stood there for a half second, still inside the lift, and I felt that cold spike in my chest. The kind you get before you even have a clear thought, like your body is pulling the emergency lever early. He gestured for me to get out and started moving like he was going to walk with me. My brain finally caught up. I made an excuse. I kept it light and polite, but firm. I indicated I didn't need him to escort me. I just needed the direction. He pointed down one side of the hall. I thanked him, stepped out, and waited until he was no longer directly blocking the lift. Then I walked the other way. Not fast, just decisively. I didn't run because I didn't want to create a chase dynamic. I didn't want to look panicked, because panic is information. I wanted to look like I belonged there, like I was just heading to wherever people go in that building. The hallway was worse the farther I went. Doors without labels, corners that swallowed the light. No footsteps but mine. I tried one door handle out of reflex, hoping it might lead somewhere public, and it was locked. My phone buzzed. My brother was calling. I answered, and I could hear the irritation in his voice immediately because I'd been gone longer than made sense. I told him I was in the McDonald's, but I was also not, and that I'd ended up in some back hallway and I was trying to get back down. The words sounded stupid even as I said them. I hung up quickly because I didn't want to be distracted. I forced myself to breathe through my nose and retrace my steps. The hallway felt like it was designed to confuse you. I found the lift again and stepped in fast. I hit the button for the floor I came from and pressed the close door button repeatedly like it could speed up reality. Back down, the lift opened and I stepped out. I made one wrong turn, forward instead of right, and ended up in another corridor section with several doors and a large glass panel wall. At first I thought it was a window because I could see the McDonald's. People sitting at tables, bright lights, normal movement. I could see them clearly, but none of them reacted to me. It was like I was invisible. That's when the unreality hit me. I could see the restaurant, but I didn't feel connected to it. Like I was behind something designed specifically so people on the other side couldn't see back. I turned around, found the right direction, and pushed through the brown door again. Downstairs, everything was loud and bright and normal. The smell of fries hit me like a wall. People moved around me without noticing I'd just come out of a door that didn't look like it should exist. I went down the stairs fast. My dad took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. He and my brother were already keyed up because I'd taken too long. I told them we needed to leave and I'd explain outside. As we walked out, I described the worker, mask, the odd eye, the way he followed me into the lift. My dad said he hadn't seen anyone like that. He'd even gone upstairs briefly to check for me, and he hadn't encountered a worker at the top. That part stuck with me. Not because it was supernatural or anything, just because it made it feel less like bad customer service and more like something that had happened out of view of the normal restaurant space. We left without ordering. I didn't even end up using the bathroom until we were far away, and by then the adrenaline had basically shut the urge off. Afterward, my brother joked about it in that nervous way people do when they don't want to sit with the fear. My dad didn't joke. He was quiet and focused on getting us back. Since then, if a door is unmarked, I don't go through it. I don't care what uniform someone is wearing. That little brown door rewired something in me, and every time I think about the double-sided mirror, I get that same cold spike again. Not because it's spooky, because it's practical, because it means you can be right next to help and still be hidden. I was 26. This was New Year's Eve 2020, and I was working downtown as a server at a sports bar because it was steady money and the tips were good. The layout matters a little. The bar rail wrapped toward the front entrance, and the regulars loved those seats because they could watch the entire floor. If you sat there long enough, you could clock every employee's pattern. When we refilled waters, when we ran food, where we set checks, who went to the back door for a smoke. It was a busy night. The kind where the music is too loud, the floor is sticky before midnight, and everybody thinks they're the main character. I'd been on my feet for hours. My feet were sore in that dull way that makes you feel older than you are. After my shift, I went to a nearby bar where a lot of service industry people ended up. It wasn't fancy, it was just close, and it was open, and it was familiar. That mattered because it felt safe. I ordered a drink, and while I was waiting, I noticed a guy I recognized from my job. He was one of our regulars, Not the friendly kind who learns your name and tips well and leaves. More like the kind who shows up often enough that you know his face and his drink, but he doesn't actually engage with anyone unless he wants something. He was older than me by at least a decade, maybe more. He always wore the same style of clothes, clean, workish, like he was coming from an office. He'd sit at the bar and watch. He didn't flirt the way some guys do. He didn't joke. He just watched, and occasionally asked questions that were a little too specific about schedules or who worked which nights. At my job, I'd written it off as harmless. Lots of people are socially awkward. Lots of people stare. It's a bar. You learn to tune things out so you can function. Seeing him at the after-work place felt like normal overlap. Downtown does that. People end up in the same spots. So I gave him a casual greeting, the kind you give someone you recognize but don't want to invite into your night. He responded immediately by telling me he'd been watching me for 3 years. He didn't say it like it was a weird thing to admit. He said it like it was an accomplishment, like he'd been holding on to it and finally got to reveal it. My brain did that fast math where you try to check reality. I hadn't even worked at that bar 3 years. But the point wasn't the accuracy. The point was the entitlement. He started listing details. Not my address or anything like that, but enough specifics about my work habits that I knew he wasn't just talking. Things about where I usually stood when we were slammed, the times I'd come outside after closing, how I'd walk to my car, the fact that I sometimes worked doubles. It hit me in a physical way. My skin felt hot, and my stomach dropped, and my mouth went dry. In that moment, the environment changed. The same bar, the same music, the same people nearby, but it stopped feeling protective. It stopped feeling like a public place. It felt like we were alone. He asked where I lived. I didn't give him a real answer. I gave the vague area answer women learn to give when they're trying to be polite without handing someone the keys to their life. He followed it with something worse. He said he'd planned to propose to me on his birthday. Again, not as a joke, not as flirtation, like a plan he'd been building toward. That's when I stopped seeing him as a weird regular and started seeing him as someone who'd built a fantasy around me. And fantasies are dangerous because they don't require your consent. I remember glancing at the door and doing that fast calculation of distance, how far to the exit, where my friends were, whether anyone had noticed my posture change, whether I could slip away to the bathroom and text someone without him following. I tried to end the interaction without triggering him. I kept my body angled away. I kept my hands busy. I didn't lean in. I didn't laugh. I didn't mirror his energy. At some point, I made the mistake of mentioning I probably wouldn't be at my job much longer. It was meant as a deflection, like I was closing the subject of me at that bar. He responded by saying I shouldn't go anywhere he couldn't find me. That sentence was the turning point. It took the whole thing from unsettling to clear. Because it wasn't admiration, it was possession. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell. I didn't want to be trapped in a confrontation in a crowded bar where he could twist the narrative and make me look dramatic. I wanted to leave with my dignity intact and my safety intact. So I moved toward other people and positioned myself where he'd have to follow me into a group. I made myself busy. I made myself unapproachable. Eventually, he drifted away like nothing happened. I didn't stay long after that. I went home with my keys threaded between my fingers like an idiot, like that would help. I checked my mirrors more than once. I took a route that wasn't my usual one, just to see if anyone was behind me. I didn't relax until my apartment door shut. The next day I went to work and looked at the bar rail differently. That spot where he used to sit wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a surveillance point. I started noticing how often he was there, how he never seemed drunk, how he didn't really talk to anyone else, how his focus stayed on the staff, not the game. I told management in the most practical way possible, not emotional, not dramatic, just facts. I didn't know what they did with it, if anything. Bars don't like banning regulars unless there's an incident with a witness. I ended up leaving that job not long after. It wasn't only because of him, but he made the decision easier. I still think about the certainty in his voice when he said he'd been watching me, like it was a normal thing to do, like time itself created a claim. Now, when I'm in public, I don't assume the familiar faces are harmless. I assume they're familiar because they've been paying attention, and I don't give strangers polite anymore if my gut says something is off. I was in my 30s. This happened 2 months ago, and I was at a Waffle House in a small southern town because it was Sunday morning and we wanted something easy before heading home. Only relevant detail? It was one of those mornings where you're running on not enough sleep and too much driving, and you're basically moving on autopilot. The layout matters. The front entrance leads into a small waiting area. The tables are close together. The breakfast bar runs along the grill, and if you sit there, you can see the entire room and the entrance at the same time. It was busy. Not packed wall to wall, but steady. Families, older couples, a couple guys in work boots, the usual Sunday mix. We put our name in and waited near the front. That's when he came in. He stood out instantly, like a wrong detail in a normal scene. He was wearing a black suit and tie, the kind that looks deliberate, not casual. Everything fit. Nothing was wrinkled. He had thick black gloves on, and there were silk scarves tied at his wrists like decorative cuffs. It wasn't fashion-forward. It was costume-like. He was pulling a large black suitcase behind him, rolling it slow over the tile. The suitcase looked heavy, not like a carry-on, more like something you'd bring to move out. The thing that really stuck, though, was his face. His eyebrows were thick and blue and looked tattooed or drawn on, extended too far, exaggerated. It made his expression look permanent, like his face was stuck in a look he chose for effect. He also had a pin on his lapel, something political-looking. I couldn't read it clearly, but it had that statement vibe. He walked in like he owned the space. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. He scanned the room, then his attention settled on us. At first I told myself it was nothing. People look around. People notice families. It's a small waiting area. You're basically forced to be aware of everyone. But he didn't do the normal glance and move on thing. He locked on. He started focusing on my husband. Specifically, my husband's tattoos. My husband has visible tattoos that catch eyes sometimes, so at first it felt like normal curiosity. Then it shifted. The questions got more personal. The kind of personal that doesn't belong in a waiting area with strangers. I answered in a vague way. My husband answered in a vague way. We weren't engaging. We weren't inviting. We were doing that careful, polite deflection you do when you want someone to lose interest without feeling rejected. We got seated pretty quickly, which felt like relief. We ended up at a table where I could still see the front. The man took a seat at the breakfast bar. That meant he had a perfect view of the entire restaurant and the door. And he positioned his suitcase near him in a way that felt intentional, like it mattered where it was. While we ate, I watched him in my peripheral vision. He didn't settle in like a normal customer. He kept shifting his attention from person to person at the bar, leaning slightly as if to draw them in, then turning his head slowly to track movement around the room. Every few minutes, I'd see someone's posture change, a shoulder tense, a head turn away, a person getting quieter. It wasn't one big incident, it was the accumulation, the vibe of someone who doesn't understand normal boundaries, or doesn't care. At one point, a hostess we recognized, someone who'd seen us there before, made a quiet point of coming near our table. She didn't sit, didn't linger long, just enough to get a message across without making a scene. She warned us to keep our daughter close when we left. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was imagining things. If staff are warning you, it's not a personal anxiety problem. It's a known issue in the room. We kept eating, but I wasn't tasting much. My focus was on timing, on leaving at the right moment, on not getting separated. My husband went up to pay when we finished. I stayed seated with our daughter, and I watched the man at the bar the whole time. As soon as my husband stood up and walked toward the register, the man moved. Not fast, not frantic, just immediate. He got up and walked over to our table like that was his plan the entire time. He stood too close. Close enough that I could smell him. Something sharp and clean, like heavy cologne layered over something stale. He looked at me, then looked down at my chest, then at my shirt, like he was choosing what kind of comment to make. I could feel my face go tight. My shoulders lifted without me meaning to, that animal body response. He started asking questions that weren't appropriate. Not overtly criminal, just sexual and invasive in that casual, entitled way. The kind that dares you to object. I didn't respond. I focused on my daughter. I shifted my chair slightly so she was behind my arm. I kept my hands where I could grab her quickly. Then he said my name. My actual name. Not ma'am, not miss. My name. I froze for a second, because I knew I hadn't told him. My husband hadn't told him. My daughter hadn't said it. We weren't talking loudly. The restaurant wasn't quiet, but it wasn't loud enough for that to be an accident. My husband turned back toward the table at the exact moment my face changed. He saw it immediately. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pause. He came over, picked up our daughter first, and put his body between me and the man. It was instinctive and practical. We left. We didn't do the normal slow exit. We didn't look back. We didn't stop to chat with staff. We walked straight out like we were late for something. In the parking lot, my husband asked how the man knew my name, and I couldn't answer. I replayed every moment. The only plausible explanations were things I hated. Maybe he overheard it at the hostess stand when we checked in. Maybe he watched close enough to read it off a receipt or a card. Maybe he'd seen us somewhere before. Maybe he'd followed us in. None of those options were good. The proof detail moment for me was later, when we got home and my husband checked our receipt. My name wasn't printed on it. Not anywhere visible. Not on a customer copy the way some places do. It was just the order, the total, and the store info. That didn't eliminate every possibility, but it cut out the easiest one. For the rest of the day, I felt exposed, like I'd been made smaller, like the world had a hole in it and we'd walked too close to it. We haven't been back to that location. Now, if we're waiting somewhere and someone sets off my gut, I don't sit there and be polite. I don't keep eating because the food is already ordered. I don't tell myself it's probably nothing. I leave. Because the scariest part wasn't the questions. It wasn't the suit. It wasn't even the suitcase. It was how smoothly he waited for the moment I was alone at the table, and how confidently he used my name like it was normal. If you're enjoying this content, feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.